For over a decade, Harry Kane scored hundreds of goals, shattered historic records, and carried the weight of the captain's armband for England. He was a master craftsman in a sport often defined by explosive prodigies, systematically dismantling defenses with a clinical precision that made him one of the most feared strikers of his generation. Yet, his legacy was accompanied by a striking paradox. He was a man who collected nearly every individual honor a striker could reasonably dream of, but was repeatedly forced to watch opponents lift the collective trophies he desperately craved. It took leaving the club of his youth, moving to a foreign league, and waiting until the age of 31 to finally earn the team honor that had eluded him for so long. This is the grounded, grueling story of how a rejected 8-year-old boy built a mind strong enough to survive the lowest valleys of elite sports and ultimately claimed the ultimate prize. Before we uncover the price he paid, leave a like to honor a captain who never learned how to quit. Harry Kane's journey did not begin with the certainty usually attached to a future star. Music. Harry Edward Kane was born in London on July 28, 1993 and raised in Chingford, East London in a family that treated football as a source of enjoyment long before it became a profession. Around the age of 8, he entered Arsenal's youth system where coaches were required to make early judgments about children whose bodies and abilities were still developing. Kane did not immediately resemble the explosive prospect many scouts expected to progress quickly. Years later, former Academy director Liam Brady acknowledged that Arsenal had considered him a bit chubby and not very athletic before admitting that releasing him had been a mistake. Those words seem almost impossible beside the player Kane eventually became. But at the time, they represented the verdict of professional evaluators, examining a very young boy. Kane later admitted that he had probably been too young to understand fully what the rejection meant. There was no dramatic promise to prove Arsenal wrong. The more important response came from his father, Pat, Music, who refused to turn disappointment into anger. Kane remembered walking toward the park behind the family home, a simple stretch of grass where he played with his father and brother using 2 trees as makeshift posts. Pat placed an arm around his son and said, "Don't worry, Harry. We'll work harder and we'll go on and we'll find another club." All right. That sentence gave the family something practical to do next. Arsenal's decision was painful, but it did not have to become the final judgment on Kane's future. His father did not search for someone to blame. He returned the focus to work. Kane later recalled that Pat placed little pressure on him and often answered setbacks with another simple phrase, "Well, let's get on with it then." That attitude did not transform an 8-year-old into an elite striker overnight. It offered a steadier lesson. Disappointment could be taken seriously without being treated as permanent. One academy's assessment did not have to define the limits of his ability. Kane could not control how scouts interpreted his body at 8 years old, but he could decide whether to keep playing after their judgment had been delivered. Music. That distinction became a recurring pattern throughout his career. When a door closed, the family did not pretend it had remained open. They accepted the result, searched for another opportunity, and continued. Music. Kane returned to grassroots football with Ridgeway Rovers, where the game still belonged to children, families, volunteer coaches, weekend fixtures, and repeated contact with the ball rather than professional predictions. The years that followed were not a hidden montage in which every touch revealed future greatness. They were a gradual education built through matches, training sessions, mistakes, physical growth, and repetition. His eventual intelligence as a striker did not depend on outrunning every defender. It grew from observing movement, recognizing space, improving his first touch, and understanding where the next phase of play was likely to develop. Those qualities required time, precisely what an early academy assessment could not provide. The boy Arsenal released, Music, had not yet grown into his body or completed his football education. The rejection should not be romanticized as painless. But Kane later acknowledged that it gave him additional drive and left him with something to prove. Music. Whenever he faced Arsenal, he did not build his public identity around bitterness. Yet he never forgot the judgment. He converted it into competitive fuel. Years later, when injuries, difficult loan spells, lost finals, and public criticism threatened to reduce his career to a single disappointment, Kane repeatedly returned to the method first modeled by his father in that Chingford Park. A result could hurt, an evaluation could be wrong. Neither one decided what happened next. Earning a professional contract at Tottenham Hotspur was an undeniable triumph, but it immediately plunged him into the unforgiving, deeply unglamorous reality of the English football pyramid, a system designed to ruthlessly separate the resilient from the fragile. Premier League clubs rarely hand starting positions to unproven teenagers, preferring instead to send them out on loan into the lower leagues to test their physical durability and mental fortitude against grown men fighting for their livelihoods. In January 2011, a 17-year-old Kane found himself sent on loan to Leyton Orient in the third tier of English football, making his senior professional debut against Rodale in a stadium that felt light years away from the pristine facilities of the Premier League. By 18, he was battling in the gritty, famously hostile environment of Millwall in the Championship, tasked with helping a struggling team fight off the terrifying threat of relegation in front of one of the most demanding fan bases in the entire country. These were not glamorous assignments played on beautifully manicured pitches. The lower divisions of English football are intensely physical, fiercely competitive arenas where veteran players rely on intimidation, and young, hyped prospects from top-tier miles can face challenges delivered with a physical intensity they have never experienced before. He absorbed the heavy hits, learned how to use his body to shield the ball against aggressive, fully grown center-backs, music, and ultimately won Millwall's Young Player of the Season award by proving he was not afraid of the physical combat. However, following a frustrating injury-hit stint at Norwich City that was entirely derailed by a painful broken metatarsal bone in his foot, his journey hit a massive, seemingly insurmountable roadblock during a subsequent loan at Leicester City. Competing in the Championship, the momentum he had carefully built over the previous years seemed to completely evaporate as he found himself increasingly confined to the margins of the squad. Forced to watch helplessly from the sidelines as other strikers were chosen to lead the line, he spent weeks relegated to the cold substitute bench, struggling to get even a few minutes of meaningful playing time under manager Nigel Pearson, feeling his dreams slipping further away with every passing match day. He later openly admitted that sitting alone in his sparsely furnished apartment during that Leicester loan was the absolute lowest moment of his entire career, a period characterized by deep, suffocating uncertainty. The sheer isolation bred a terrifying doubt, and he was so overwhelmed by the painful lack of progress that he actually considered walking away from the journey entirely, telling his father over the phone that he wanted to quit the loan spell and return home to London. His father, offering the exact same steady, unwavering voice that had guided him years earlier in the park, simply told him to keep working, stay focused on the process, and trust that it would all turn out fine in the end. It was during this specific period of deep professional insecurity that he stumbled upon a television documentary about Tom Brady, famously known as The Brady Six, a film that chronicles the career of an athlete, who was famously passed over by nearly every team. He watched the story of an American quarterback who was notoriously overlooked in the 2000 NFL draft because scouts deeply doubted his physical athleticism, criticized his slow running speed, and questioned his unimpressive body shape. The parallels were incredibly striking, and he realized with absolute clarity that the legendary quarterback's journey of being completely underestimated reminded him intimately of his own struggles within the English football system. It was a profound psychological anchor, offering concrete evidence that an overlooked athlete could still outlast the judgment of scouts through superior processing speed and an unbreakable work ethic. The documentary provided the exact mental shift he needed, proving that early rejection was not a definitive judgment, as long as the unseen preparation behind closed doors never stopped.